I can recognize a lot of faces from the last event by Dr. Valerie Jones-Taylor, where she focused her research, where she was really talking about her research that combined microaggressions as well as stereotype threat as explanations as to why high-achieving African-American students, but also students of color, at institutions that are considered very selective, right? And her argument, her research really is that the class analysis for achievement gap was just not sufficient to explain why there was such disparate experiences among high-achieving African-American students. And although that the research was very profound, important, and significant, in conversation with Verna, I said, well, let's go a little bit deeper, right? It's wonderful to think about what was going on in classrooms at UC Berkeley or at Stanford, but what might some of those experiences have been like at Davidson? Is there any overlap? Can we learn from a localized experience? And so I'm just so honored and so pleased that actually several people from DBAN were interested, but not everybody is close enough that they're able to share with us their experiences. But I do have 4 panelists. I'll go from here. We have Janet Stovall Harrell, 85 graduate with an English major, currently the principal of the Point Communications Consultancy. Next to her is Rashida Hassan, a 96 graduate, psychology major. She is a technology delivery manager at Signature Consultants and former senior vice president at Bank of America. Next to her is Derek Thompson, 07 graduate, political science major, English for education concentration, management consultant at Carlyle and Gallagher Consulting Group. Was also a VP at Bank of America. And we did have Malcolm Moses Hampton, who was a 2012 graduate in the pre-med program. He was unable to attend last minute, but he did sit down with me and share with me some of his experiences going through pre-med. And so Darren Morgan over here, 08 graduate who's currently very pivotal in a lot of our inclusive admissions policies at Davidson, has kind of stepped in as the recent grad experience. So we had a really nice conference call. I posed 3 questions. I also shared with them some of the research on stereotype threat and racial microaggressions so that they can get an understanding of what this community of folks have been exposed to. So I'll just start off with 3 questions, and then at the end, we'll just open it up for Q&A, okay? So the first question, in a study by sociologist Janice McCabe, the researcher interviews a Latina student who is attending a predominantly white college and asked about how differently she experienced her culture and identity at this new school, at which point she responds, there is a difference between being a minority and feeling like a minority, and I realized that when I came here. So to DBAN, I asked, does this statement resonate with you, and if so, how? And we'll just...
And when I had asked that question, my answer to that was, before I got to Davidson, I didn't know that being black was a liability. I grew up I went to public school. I went to first generation, and my school was about 50-50, and I had white friends, I had black friends, but I never felt that being black was a problem. It was a positive thing. It wasn't positive, it was negative, it was neutral. I came to Davidson, and all of a sudden, I found out that it came with a whole set of complications that I didn't know existed. So that was the difference when I came here, that I saw about being black.
Speaking from my experience, I came to Davidson in '92, and I had probably extra baggage with me, though, because my senior year, I was in a pretty bad car accident. So I had the option of continuing my senior year or basically putting it on hold. So I had a lot of emotional weight that I brought to Davidson with me, still being bruised from a bad car accident. Having graduated, I came to Davidson, I think I was 16, so I had not dated. I mean, there were just so many additional factors. For me, I had had the experience of going to a small private, all African American school up until I was in 6th grade. I also had the label, of course, of being an African American Muslim. So when you add all of these variables to the mix, I was probably nonetheless kind of an oddball at some point, just trying to feel my way through Davidson. But by the time I went to middle school, I attended middle school through high school, I was one, if not at max two, of African Americans in my class. So Davidson, from a setting perspective, was very similar for me, which was something that I was not looking for initially when I was searching for colleges. But my father was familiar with Davidson through some of the clients that he had and how great of an institution it was. But his underpinning message was, I'd like for you to go here so you can see what the real world is like. Because if you can make it there, then basically you can make it anywhere. It's kind of like a microcosm. And I didn't really understand or probably appreciate it until things started clicking for me my junior year. My freshman year was tough, as I shared. There was a lot of stuff that I had to work through for myself. Sophomore year, I was getting myself a little bit more grounded, learning how to, I would say, study, because I came from an environment where, yes, I was in accelerated classes, etc., but it was very easy for me to basically speed read, pass a test, etc. And so, and I did not have that, I would say, extra training in terms of how to establish relationships with teachers. It was go to class, leave, hang out with your friends, go to band, etc. So there was this routine that I had that didn't necessarily apply to the Davidson environment. So some of my initial struggles, where perhaps there were some microaggressions there, I didn't really notice them because I was trying to just kind of get through that first year. But like I said, by my junior year, things had kind of settled for me, and I understood the extra layers that are inherently here, that if you weren't necessarily introduced to how to maneuver in this environment, then it could basically be the difference between graduating or not graduating, or graduating in 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. So I can understand the difference between being a minority and feeling like a minority, but I really didn't, I would say, clue into it until I was probably a junior.
So I came from a private school in Charlotte, I went to Providence Day, where there were far less black people there than what there were at Davidson. Sometimes tough to believe. So I went through that process, I think, at a little bit of a younger age, of like realizing, hey, that I'm different. Because in first grade, you kind of look around the classroom and on the basic level of, hey, they're a different color for me. But I got used to that. I had a great experience, first grade through 12th grade. So coming to Davidson was really a natural fit. I also had football on top of that, so sports always makes it, I think, a little bit easier to fit in because you have a common struggle. You spend so much time with each other, and it's such a large group of friends. So, for me, it wasn't as much of a struggle as it was. I noticed the struggle of my other black classmates and really other minorities who maybe didn't come from the same background. And it was like the first time I really saw people like struggling just with the social aspect of it, because like I said, in high school, we all came from similar, all the black students in Providence, we surprisingly all came from like similar backgrounds. We came from 2-parent homes. Everybody's parents had master's degrees, so it wasn't the same as like when we came to Davidson, and you have this wider, you have more variance, I guess, in people's backgrounds. So it was really that first time of noticing the struggle of other minorities and saying, hey, it's not just because they don't want to like have friends or anything like that. Like, no, it's like a real struggle that they're having to, acclimate themselves to this new environment. So I would say, you definitely learn about being a minority here, one way or the other.
Yeah, for me, I'm from Atlanta. My high school was about 2,000 kids, and we're all black. From elementary through high school, I'd never gone to a school with more than one race. So for me, coming to Davidson, this was the first environment where I had to kind of learn how to adjust socially in different social settings, maybe at BSC parties or in the classroom. So it was a different feel for me. In my high school, even though we're all black, we had a lot of differences, either socioeconomic status or religion. And like Rashida, I had the added burden, I guess, or difference rather, of being Muslim in an all-Christian setting for the most part. So I had that layer to it. So for me, even though in high school were differences of religion and economic background, we were still a family. So even though I knew I was a minority, it didn't quite feel like a minority. At Davidson, it was a little bit of a switch. Here, if you go to different parties, you'll see that even though we are one big collective bunch of students as Davidson students, but underneath that, it feels like there's certain layers in a sense. And it feels like there's a group of more or less the general population, and then the minorities kind of band together, whether it's the Hispanic and Latino students or Black or Asian. So it feels like there is a sense of or feeling of a us and then everyone else, which was a stressful setting for me to be in, especially as a first year student coming to a completely new environment.
Malcolm had a perspective slightly different from the panelists. He says, I came from a predominantly white, Jewish, and very privileged background. I sensed that minority was code for something negative because first, minority assumes you're outnumbered by a majority, and the statistics or rationale constantly being used to describe why African Americans are important to be at Davidson seem to emphasize that there must have been a deficit or a problem in the process of being addressed. The second question, the scholarship on stereotype threat and racial microaggressions are pretty clear about the types of experiences most commonly experienced by African American males as well as females on predominantly white campuses and in the classroom. For African American males, a common assumption is that they have a propensity for criminal or deviant activity and hostility, that they are on athletic scholarships rather than academic merit scholarships, that they come from an at-risk urban background. For African American women, they commonly report feeling invisible in the classroom, except for when racial topics are brought up. In that case, they are expected to be spokespeople for their entire race and or gender. And being a spokesperson comes at a price: anxiety, social isolation from various communities for either being too Black or too radical. So if the DBAM members could share maybe a personal example of a microaggression you experienced either in a classroom or academic environment at Davidson, and explain how it made you feel at the time and if there was a lasting impact in your professional life afterwards.
I graduated in '85, and when I was here, I think there were like 14 Black women. I think 7 of them were in my class. I was the only Black English major for a long time. And so when we were in class, we didn't read, the only books I ever read about any Black authors at all were when I did an independent study with a teacher, and we asked the one Black professor to do a class for us in Black novel. He put together a class. I never read a book that had anything to do with Black people. However, occasionally, because it was an English major, you get something that had something to do with somebody Black in it. And I got everybody would turn around and look. And in terms of what that did, and I didn't mind answering the questions at all. But to me, it was a teaching moment. I don't know that anybody else liked it, but they got time. But in terms of what it has done to me now, I have daughters. I have an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they are in a private, predominantly white Catholic school. And my daughter comes home. My 18-year-old has come home, and she said to me, we were reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and the N-word came up. And everybody turned around and looked at me. She said, what did you do when that happened to you? I said, well, you can't do what I did, because I was in college, you're in high school. I said, but what I would suggest to you is, do what I did in that, answer the question. But be prepared for the pushback. And then I proceeded to call her teacher and said, I hear this is happening. She's been told to answer the question, but what you may not do is you may not argue with her. If you're gonna argue with her, then don't let her answer that question. So, you know, coming through here, like she said, it prepares you for the real world in many ways. You know, I've seen it happen all the time. You become the spokesperson. You know, I was in a religion class and I had a kid stand up in religion class and say, you know, the Bible says slaves should love their masters, and since you black people are so religious, I don't understand why you have a problem. And he saw absolutely nothing wrong with saying that in class. I was halfway asleep, it's 8 o'clock class, but I woke up and I explained to him why it was a problem, and the professor just ended class after that. And so, you know, there were these times when, in some ways, the one thing I've come to appreciate about Davidson now, that I did not appreciate at the time, was that even though you got singled out in those small classes, you had an opportunity to say something about it. If I'd been in a class with 300 kids at some bigger school, I wouldn't have been able to do that. If I'd been at certain schools where that question, people had thought those things, but they wouldn't stand up and say it, you know, I applaud the people who were stupid enough to say that stuff. Because they opened the door for me to be able to say something. And even though I felt like I got the moniker of being, you know, the angry black woman, that happened pretty quickly my freshman year. And so, and I do think sometimes what I said got dismissed for that reason. But at the end of the day, I was in a place where I could say it. You know, I never felt like any of the professors, I don't know, I don't know. I mean, I got good grades. I don't know. Maybe it could have affected my grades. I don't know. But I never felt like here, I couldn't say what I wanted to say. Maybe I was stupid. Maybe I shouldn't have said it. I know plenty of my friends felt like they could not do that. They said, you know, I could never say that in class. And like I said, I may have just been stupid and didn't know that I shouldn't say it. But for me, being that here, had I not come here, I don't know that I would be who I am now. Because that anger and that pushing back, I didn't have to do it in high school. I did it here, and I've never stopped. And I'm trying to teach my girls the same thing. They don't do that. They don't do it now. I didn't do it in high school. But I think that if you are an African American, at least when I was here, Davidson either made you or broke you. And I saw plenty of my friends that broke, who came out of here and was not the right thing for them. It made me. And, you know, for all the hurt that caused, it was painful. I wasn't having fun at the time. I threatened to leave, I don't know how many times. But in the end, I'm glad that I went through it. Because like I said, I am who I am now because of that. I was bad.
For me, let me see. I was sharing with Tayson that you know, I come from a large family, so there are seven children in the family. I am number 3, so I have 2 older sisters, and my brother is the absolutely youngest. The history of my family are more along the lines of small business owners, so traditionally trained in trades. So my dad's like a master upholsterer, and my mom owned a beauty salon. I was the first one to actually start and continue on through a 4-year education. All of my siblings have completed at least their undergraduate degree, and many of them their master's degree at this point. But when I came to Davidson, my 2 older sisters were not in school. One of them was in the military, and the other one was doing whatever she wanted to do. So when I came to Davidson, it was quite the adjustment. I think in looking back, the first I would consider kind of misstep, which could be a microaggression, was the fact that I really did not have a good advisor. And it was not really explained to me what an advisor was supposed to do. So when I came to Davidson, not knowing necessarily even how to structure your first set of classes to set you up for success, so to speak, I met with this individual. This individual helped me sign up for some classes, and that was the one and only time I met with him. When I look back on it, I think that the the situation, whether it's coming from a white person or someone that looks like you, it's the same outcome in the sense that perhaps you have a stereotype in your head of how someone at an institution where there aren't that many of you would actually be in a position to help you and would want to go above and beyond. I'm not saying that this individual did not want to do that, but my expectation upon reflection is that I would have expected, me coming in with my background, that as a young person just in general, there would have been an extra effort to make sure that, hey, do you understand what it means to take this combination of classes your first semester? And that conversation did not happen. So while many of my friends, roommates, etc., were having extra hours of fun, I was figuring out what the heck to do at 2 and 3 in the morning to get through my first semester. When eventually there were individuals that came on campus, John Eves was a very good resourceful individual for me, and then of course Dr. Fairley came on campus while I was here, and so along the way I ended up meeting people who would help me kind of figure out what I didn't know, those gaps that I had, but that was probably the first experience. I was tuned into some of the stereotypes in terms of what expectations were for minorities on campus, in particular African American males, because I had friends who were basketball players and football players, and some of them were, big burly guys, and it wasn't as if we had Davidson uniforms, but if they were walking along a path at night, then they would actually get pulled over by the Davidson police as if they did not belong here. So I was tuned into those types of situations. While I didn't have a direct experience like that, but I could see how that impacted individuals who had worked so very hard to get here, and then to have people who were quote unquote protecting the environment look at you, stop you, perhaps frisk you, as if you did not belong, and then you had to carry that weight with you on campus the next day, go to class, pretend like nothing happened, but all the while your only outlet was really to share it, in a dorm with friends like me, or the experience where we're talking about Black Student Coalition, or the BSC. When I was here, I don't know that there were that many more African Americans on campus. I think there may have been 10 or 12 in my class. By the time we finished, there might have been 9. And when we would have a gathering at our student house, it might have just been only us. Now, the difference would be if, when we tried this one time, we turned on music that wasn't necessarily music I was listening to, and then more people came. Conversely, if we were to go to another party on the campus and they were playing music that we traditionally listen to, then everybody was there and everybody was having a good time. So it was very difficult to figure out, how do you balance that combination? Because you have this little house that's supposed to serve a purpose, but you ended up getting just as many people to your events as a social function as you would if you were having a forum on racial justice. I mean, it was just, and that to me also was, it was kind of saddening. At the end of the day, you have this big space, it's a nice space, but you really didn't have that many visitors that just came in and said, hi, we just came to hang out for a while. But you would see that happening in other places.
So it's funny, actually, you took a little bit of the piece because, I was one of the early football players. And we actually, I guess it was a quasi-social experiment that we had, or I guess we had to find a way to make it funny to ourselves, but we called it the purse clutch game. And we would count up, walking back and forth to the library, how many times white women would clutch their purses when we were wearing the infamous Davidson football hoodies, which I'm sure everybody's seen. The big black, they have your number on the side, so they're pretty easy to identify that, hey, you go here and it says Davidson football in front. But if you wear that, and especially at night, you know, and you're in between a lamp, yeah, people are gonna clutch their purses or, you know, completely divert to a different path. And, you know, and it was people that, like, I knew in my classes, and I'm like, come on, like, really? You know, and so, but it was one of those things that I guess, like, I took with me into the business world now because I'm almost overly conscious, I guess, about how I appear or the body language that I use, because I realize that, you know, being a large black male can be intimidating to people, so I have to, like, really be conscious about it. And it's something that, you know, you would think that, you know, hey, you know, you shouldn't really have to worry about, you know, being a black football player, you know, just being, you know, just trying to speak with someone, but, like, I really think about that now. And in some ways, I mean, I guess it has helped me, because, you know, I know I can work a room with people, because, you know, you don't want somebody to be intimidated, because then they just kind of completely tune out to what you're trying to say to them. But it was definitely, I guess, one of those things that, you know, we didn't really expect, I guess, to come across in our time here at school, but I mean, it happened.
For me, I had, you know, being from the suburbs of Atlanta, I never really had any interaction with the cops until I got here, which was interesting, you know. During final exams, I could walk down Concord Road. I remember one night in particular, and yeah, I was wearing like a black hoodie, sweatpants, because, you know, baggy clothes is what was in at the time. And I wore them every day. And one day in particular, I remember walking down Concord Road just to clear my mind during exams, and I just see this bright searchlight come on, and the cops pulled me over or whatever, and then showed him my Davidson ID. He left. 5 minutes later, another cop came and did the exact same thing. So, you know, things like that, they do take a burden on you while you're here. In the classroom, coming in as a freshman, I remember I met with my advisor, and this was probably the most frustrating part of my freshman year. Being from this large public school, all you hear about Davidson is how rigorous it is, how demanding it's gonna be, how challenging it's gonna be. And when you hear about Atlanta Public School being not so great, you get a little bit worried. And I remember as a freshman, I came in and I met with my advisor for the first time. And I had all these ideas of being an economics major and minor in political science, and just studying both at the time. And I remember my advisor told me that I couldn't do it. And for me, it felt like he was saying that I couldn't do it because I was who I am. You know, he didn't know my academic background. I came out of high school with like a 3.9 GPA, tons of APs, but I still felt discouraged in a sense. And as a freshman, that was the very last thing that I needed to hear. So, you know, it took a toll on me mentally and socially in a sense. So it took me about a year or two to really get my bearings and figure out who I was academically, get the confidence in myself. And that was the one thing that I did take into the workforce afterwards. After I graduated from here, I went on to work at the YMCA for a year. I worked at Vanguard, one of the banking companies, for a couple of years. So I took that confidence of, even though I didn't have that economics background, because I didn't do economics, I did political science and religion, I still felt like I could manage myself academically to the point where I could learn new skills and new trades and, you know, apply that to the workforce wherever I go. So that confidence is something that I taught myself while I was here and made sure that wherever I go, I'm able to apply it.
Now, Janet, if you wouldn't mind, during our conference call, you had given an example. It's not just about people being scared, right? But there's actual examples where you believe faculty singled out black football players for cheating, and there was a bit of a scandal. Do you mind kind of talking a little bit about that?
I dated a football player when I was here, and he roomed with another football player, and they were both math majors. They took a test, and they got, you know, it was a take-home test, so honor codes, and the pledge was there. They took the test back in, and they got some of the same wrong answers. I forgot how they would tell them. Which you have same right, same wrong. They had something there. The professor decided that they cheated. Called them up on the honor code violation. They were both seniors at the time. And he said that, you know, it was collusion on the pledge assignment. They were going to put them both out because black people would just disappear The honor code would happen, see somebody one day, and they're like, where'd they go? Honor code violation. And we call it kangaroo court, because you just disappeared. And they were getting ready to disappear. But by that point, we knew to pay attention. And so we paid attention, because what happened was there were 2 white football players who were in the classroom who got the same answers, and nothing happened to them. And because we started paying attention to what the Honor Council was doing, that's how we figured out this happened. And so, but what's disturbing is that once we called it to attention, once we went to the honor court, and kind of raised the question, they put one of them out and kept the other one here. And of course, I'm arguing, and my boyfriend was the one who had to sit down. So he graduated a year later, graduated my class. And I remember saying, I'm an English major, I know vocabulary. Collusion means you both did it. And of course, everybody told me, shut up, we saved one. Just let it go. We saved one. But to me, it was, the Honor Council had to save face, because they really had made a mistake. They had to save face, so they kicked one kid and one kid kicked out. And the white students never got called on this.
I want to read something from Malcolm about some of the microaggressions he experienced. And by the way, he's also currently a fellow, the NSF laboratory technician at the Ramirez Neuroscience Laboratory. Don't call him up on these comments, by the way. But he said, I heard a lot during my stay here. You are so well spoken, just for speaking in a complete sentence. People at Davidson are surprised that my parents are married, that they are professionals, an engineer and a medical administrator, that I have had the same girlfriend for 6 years, that I majored in neuroscience and I want to be a physician. And by the way, he's been accepted at Wake Forest Medical. Recently, a peer at the lab confessed to me that he just assumed I was from a bad inner city public school and that I came from a broken home. He didn't know why he thought that, but he did. And he's a person of color too. I am glad that he shared with me his stereotypes and was upfront. Most don't have the courage to do that. I think my experiences at Davidson were different because I was protected early on. I came in through Stride. My pre-major advisor was Dr. Fairley, so she never told me what major was too tough or that med school would be too difficult and out of my reach. Even during those first semesters when my grades were not good, she still taught me how to navigate. The campus welcomed me and encouraged me to join the fraternity. I was on the football team, so my time and activities were managed. I also learned early on how to make white people comfortable around me. If you're familiar with the Paul Mooney skit about the smiling Negro, that's what I do to white company, to make them feel more comfortable around me. So if you're black and have a scowl on your face, even if you have a perfectly good reason for it, it makes them uncomfortable. The final question is, faculty participants in the Inclusive Pedagogy series have observed that current Davidson students are far more comfortable discussing matters related to gender and sexual orientation than they are discussing race and racism. What are your thoughts about this observation? And again, I want to share something from Malcolm first and then we'll open it up. He says, I agree with that observation. I think white people here have pretty much given up on racism. They realize that they cannot or will not get rid of it, so they are more comfortable talking about sexism and homophobia because it relates to people in their community and family. And minorities don't make it easier for them either. The campus is getting more diverse, which could be a blessing or a curse, which is a good thing, but that means that they are less tolerant of racism and stereotyping. So even if a white person wants to learn from their mistakes, they may be afraid to ask a minority, in fear that they will say something stupid. I helped interview for the Terry Scholars, a leadership and service scholarship, and they were all white. 5 of the 7 wanted to advocate for LGBT rights, but not one wanted to advocate for racial minorities or fight against racism.
I agree, and I think that the point that he made, it's easy to understand why that's the case. Because if you are white, you can be LGBT, you can't be black. So it's okay to talk about that because you know people they may be in your family, it may be you, but you can't ever be black. So you don't want to mess with that too much. And I remember when I wrote an article one time. I don't know what I was mad about, but usually when I got mad, I wrote in the newspaper. And I think I do remember. I lived off campus because my freshman year, somebody made a little black dog, put a little fake Gucci purse, and hung it by a noose and set it on fire in the hallway. And so when I told my dad I wanted an apartment, he said no. And then I sent him the picture and he said, okay. So I got to move off campus. So I would come on campus, I drive and park and come on campus every morning. And I generally was in a bad mood. I mean, because I'd come to campus and thought, okay, what fresh hell today? What am I going to put up with today? And I remember somebody, I know he was put up to it. He came to me, he goes, I just want to ask a question, why are you always mad? And to the point, you know, the thing with the scowl on your face. And I said, well, you know what? I wasn't as mad before you asked that question as I'm about to come now. And so I remember I wrote something in the newspaper about it. And my concern was, if you want to know why black people are mad, you know, have the courage to just go ask somebody. You want to know what we're doing, just ask, because you can't figure it out. And the funny thing is, in the next week, a white student countered with an editorial and said, what you're asking is ridiculous. You know, we don't have to ask because we don't care. And then the week after that, another white student came back and said, yes, we do have to care. If we care, you know, I realize that we can't ask every black student. Some black students don't want to be asked, but this is a white student saying, the truth is we will never know what it's like to be black. But if we want to understand what it is that how we hurt, we have to ask somebody black. And that was a 3-week thing that went in the newspaper. I actually have the clippings. But, you know, that is true. You just, it is easier to talk about something that doesn't threaten you. It's easier to talk about something that you understand than it is to have the courage to step up to something that you don't know anything about, that you might find out you're not so great about. Because the reality is if you are born white in America, you don't have a choice not to be privileged. You're born with a certain set of privileges, but you can choose not to discriminate. You can't choose not to be racist. Black people are racist. Any race values their race. That's just the nature of it. You can't choose that, but you can choose not to discriminate. But the only way you learn not to do these microaggressions is you have to ask somebody. And it's a very scary thing to do. It's like walking on a minefield. I get that. But if you don't do it, nothing ever changes.
I mean, you know, the difference between discussing race or discussing sexuality, you know, we can get in a room, we can discuss sexuality. You don't know who's gay or anything like that, but you can't hide the person who's black. Like, if the person who's black sitting there discussing race, everybody looks at it. So, you know, and you know, you had that propensity, like everybody wants to turn to you, and like Janet said, they want you to like speak for your whole race, which, you know, you can't do. My experience is totally different from my parents' experience. It's totally different from Darren's or anybody's, because, you know, we all have different backgrounds. You know, you know, I mean, you know, if that question was asked to a person, like, explain what it's like to be white, you don't want to speak for your whole race because there's so many different people. So, you know, it's one of those things. It's just one of those things where it's just a difficult situation. But you know, you have to have that conversation, and you know, you have to just ask someone, you know, what it's like. You know, most black people I say are willing to answer the questions if you just ask it. But you know, but if you don't ask it, it's only going to continue to be perpetuated.
I definitely agree with the statement. I feel that with LGBT, in regards to race issues, it's with the race is deep rooted. I feel like with race you have, especially when it comes to blacks or whatever, it's 450 years of slavery and guilt and frustration and just confusion and questions regarding it. So it becomes a little bit harder to talk about. It's one of those things that you really don't want to discuss because you never know how the other person's going to feel. On Davidson's campus, I think in the past probably 30 or so years, we've done a lot in the realms of diversity and increase the number of students of color on campus, but we haven't necessarily done a lot in return in terms of LGBT issues. And I think that makes it a little bit easier to discuss issues regarding homosexuality and LGBT than it does to race, because we feel like with diversity, looking at the difference between the class of 95 when it was 14 people, and you know, our years it was kind of a lot, that we feel like we've done enough in a sense. So it becomes a little bit easier to help out people that or discuss issues that deal with gay rights than things regarding color equality.
I agree with everything that's been said up here. I think the one thing though that kind of resonates with me is something that you mentioned, and it's the fact that you can't hide your color unless of course you are genetically dispositioned to actually look like a white person, which in some cases there have been cases just like that. But for the most part, if I'm sitting in a room and there are 10 white people around me, and someone says, well, who's black in the room? Well, they're gonna look at me. So it's not only the first thing that you recognize about someone next to their gender, but along the same line, something that Janet mentioned, and is when you start to talk about race, it gets at a very deep personal seed level that individuals have to be ready to go there themselves, because you have to think back to conversations that maybe your parents have had and that influence that it's had on you, or conversations that your grandparents have had, and patterns that you have yourself. I work in an environment and there's like a 6'5" big black guy, smiles all the time. There's another guy that's like 6'2", and he's more along the lines of a string bean. But we're working on this project, and I said, hey guys, you're having issues. Why don't you just walk down the street to meet with these individuals so that you stop going back and forth through email? It's only like a 10-minute walk. So sure enough, they start making trips down to the Gateway Center in uptown Charlotte. Well, the issues start to resolve. We're in a team meeting with everyone after the fact, and Barry, this big guy, says, oh yeah, well, we started going down the Gateway, like, she said, and, issues are, resolving themselves. And so someone blurts out, well, I mean, look at Barry. If I send Barry and, this Chima down there, and in my head, the stereotype that comes up is I'm sending the enforcer down there, right? It's this 6'6" and 6'2" or whatever, 2 black guys going down there to get some issues resolved. So who's not gonna work with them? That's kind of the picture that's in someone's head. I work beside a lady, and she means no harm, but I tend to like colors. There was a period where I'd wear black all the time, and it wasn't that I was depressed, it was just like I thought. So as I started adding color to my wardrobe, now people are saying, oh, well, here comes the color lady. And
might get you cut
but she thinks, because she's explained her situation as being from New York and kind of liberal, etc., that there are certain phrases that are open to her that might not be open to other people. I kind of let those little brains move along the path, but I do think that if you want to have a healthy discussion about race, then each individual has to be honest with themselves and say, okay, at some point I've said that. At some point I've said, well, I have white friends. And at some point, some white person has said, well, one of my best friends is black. And it's those types of phrases and just mannerisms, or we've looked at a table, and this happens so often at Davidson. My first week, I went and I sat with my roommate because she was nice, and she happened to be white. Well, there was a table of black students, and I walked by, and I didn't speak to everybody, and I went and I sat with my roommate. Well, I heard all kinds of hell afterwards, because now
You didn't sit down?
I didn't sit with them. And so over the course of 4 years, it was figuring out the balance between that. Am I gonna go on a ski trip? Because that's not typically what black people do. Or am I gonna go hiking? Because that's not typically what Black people do. And you get to a point in your life where you're like, you know what? You do what you do because these are the things that you enjoy. So yeah, so now I'm the Muslim yoga teacher who goes hiking and skiing. And I love that, and I think to your point, Davidson either makes you or it breaks you, and you develop leadership capabilities and the ability to tolerate a lot that comes at you, not because you were oppressed per se, but because of the fact that somehow you took that negative energy and figured out a way to say, okay, I don't have to live like this, and I don't have to tolerate it, and I'll figure out how to make it work for me, and along the way I'll come back and I'll give, during panels like this, or I'll go talk to students at the BSC. And I'll say that just because you may have increased your quota of minorities does not mean that racism doesn't exist. That's typically just kind of a visual facade, but it's getting better.
I think diversity is not something you have, it's something you do. It's not something that exists sort of, it's not a noun, it's a verb. And the problem is, I think it's very easy. When you look at the difference, the number of students that are here now, Black students are here than when I was here, it looks like a lot has changed. A lot has changed on the surface. But the reality is when I see the I-2 Davidson, and the older alumni saw that on the internet and it was my Facebook page, and we were going back and forth going, oh yeah, I used to get that one. I used to get that one. I heard that one. And here we are 30 years later, and we have students saying some of the same things that we said. Then I think Davidson has to ask itself, what have you done? What have we done? Because I consider myself part of this. What have we done to really make this a diverse place? We have more people of color, but have we really done anything? We just got some folks here. Because it breaks my heart when I hear students saying the same stuff that we said 30 years ago. Students who came out of different backgrounds, because a lot of the students now came out of white schools or private schools. Most of us are first generation. Most of us came out of public schools. I'm convinced that they used to recruit the football team out of schools where they, by all rights, should not have made it here. They were recruiting football players who spoke Ebonics as their first language. And I thought, why are you doing this? Because this kid's going to get here, and they're not going to do well, and you're going to say Black people are stupid. When the reality is that this is a kid who needed something, a buffer in there to make him ready. All these guys graduated, and they're all brilliant, and they're all doing amazing things now. But it was such a struggle because this school was not prepared for them. It didn't try to, it threw them in there and said, you make it. And so that's not what should happen here. If we are going to be a school that is going to change things, then we have to put the things in place to actually change it. We cannot rest on the fact that you got Black people here.
We want some minutes for questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Questions, comments? I have a question for you, Janet. You said that when the incident occurred in the classroom, the professor stopped the class. Now, what would you have liked the professor to do at that point? What would have helped you in that moment?
If he had addressed it. If he had addressed it. Because at that point, this kid had picked one thing out of the entire Bible to have a discussion about. If that professor had, I don't have to back me up because he didn't have to agree with me. He didn't have to agree with the way I dealt with it. But had he taken his clearly considerable knowledge about this and put it in perspective and explained it, that would have been much better. He just decided the class had gone to hell at that point, and there was nothing that was going to happen because it did get pretty rough. And like I said, I'm not sure that helped. It scared him that the kid never said anything else to me. But I think had the professor stepped up, put it in context, and been the authority figure who dealt with it, not necessarily telling this kid that you can't say this in my class, but explaining to him why what he said didn't make sense. I think it would have been a teaching moment that didn't end up.
My question, racism manifests in the form of microaggressions in my close friendship has been one of the most difficult, emotionally draining things I've ever experienced here in my life. And so how do you choose between helping and enlightening and educating your friend, or just ditching them because they don't care for your liberation?
I'll say that, I always try to speak, because I've experienced the same thing throughout my time here and other places. You try to talk to that friend, if they don't want to listen to what you have to say, or they just blow it off as, she's just mad for whatever reason, I've come to realize, one thing, you can't help everybody. You try to help as many people as you can, but some people don't want to be helped, and they aren't going to want to listen to you. So, you have to kind of decide on your own, do I feel like listening to this every time we're together, or, are they actually trying to make a change, or do I just need to drop them all together? That's just the way I go with it, because, you can't waste so much time trying to, educate people that don't want to be educated.
And the burden is hard. I raised hell for 4 years, and some of it was very vocal and very visible, but some of it was on a one-to-one basis. When I had a hallmate ask me, that stuff you put in your hair grease, is that like car grease? And dumb questions like that. You feel it's an assault, and I even had friends who were trying to do the right thing, but because I was tired of all the other stuff, that just made me more tired. And I'll tell you personally, I actually had, I'm convinced now, it's nervous breakdown. I picked my books up spring term junior year, brought them back to my apartment, dropped them on the floor, started crying for 3 days, took them back and withdrew. Yeah, I knew that I better walk across that stage in 1985 in May, or my parents were going to kill me. So I went that summer, made up the classes, but I physically could not walk on this campus for a term. And it was because of things like that. I was just tired. I was tired of feeling like I had to carry the burden. Some of it I took on myself, but even if I hadn't, like you said, in the friendships that you had, even if you weren't the one who wanted to stand on the soapbox and fuss about it, just the day-to-day microaggressions became macroaggressions eventually, and it wore you down. So it is hard, and I think that, like Darren says, you have to decide the people that you can fix or help, the ones who genuinely want to be something different or want to do something different, and you help them as best you can. And it's a burden. And then the other ones, you just have to say, you know what, let life move.
But I think it's some people that like truly care and truly want to learn, and you can feel that. You get a sense of those people that are really interested in the culture and in knowing who you are as a person. When I was a freshman, I had one friend, and again, I'm coming from this all-black high school, so the first white friend that I ever had the chance to meet would be here. And it was one guy from Kentucky. I was the first black person he had ever really hung out with, right? And we didn't talk for like the first year. It wasn't until we had an internship or the summer before sophomore year that we really bonded together. And we just had an open and honest conversation to the point where, we both recognized that we were the first friend of opposite races that we ever had. And we got to the point where we could jokingly call each other token. He was my token white friend, I was his token black friend. It was cool. And that's how we, we lived the rest of our days at Davidson as this is my token. And it was a friendly, we knew that was a private thing. We couldn't say that to everybody, but we were so strong. When he got married a couple years ago, I flew out, I was in his wedding, still the only black person there, but it was still just a lot of fun because regardless, it's family. So you have to find that person that is truly truly caring and really genuine about knowing. Because some people might put on a facade that they're really interested, but they really don't care. And some people really want to take the time and the effort in getting to know something outside of their own cultural base.
We're at the top of the hour, so I can take one more question.
I agree with everything everybody said on the panel. Thank you for your time. My question is kind of towards progressing and addressing these issues in terms of a faculty perspective. It is difficult to experience the microaggressions, to be stereotyped, to be the source of speak for your race, to carry the emotional burden of being the spokesperson. How, if at all, can that be understood from a faculty perspective? Because I wonder where the problem persists, should you had to have suffered so much, going after your particular example, losing those valuable credits, how does that incorporate for the administration, faculty level, if at all? And then in light of the fact that the problem 30 years, 40 years later still continues. And that's a question for everybody.
Faculty are people. And so the same issues that you're gonna have with students, you have with faculty. If you have, I don't know the average age of the professors now, but let's say you have professors who are roughly my age, and I'm 50. If you have a professor who grew up watching television, at the point when you form your opinions, let's not discuss if you watch the news now. How many, if you're black, you watch the news, you hear something that sounds bad, you say, I'll be really black. You do. And so, because you know that just reinforces a stereotype. But if you have professors who have grown up in an era where what they saw on TV was Sanford and Son, Good Times, they saw buffoonery, they saw, black women depicted in one of the 3 stereotypes we have, which is, Mammy, Jezebel, or Sapphire. That's what they saw. And so the reality is that even if you have a faculty member or a professor who is still a human being, who wants to do something different, it's going to be a challenge. They have to decide. At the end of the day, you have to decide that you want to do something different. And it's just like being an alcoholic, where the first thing you gotta do is admit that you don't know. Admit what you don't know. Admit what your prejudices may be. Because being prejudiced does not have to mean that you're bigoted. Prejudice is natural, but you make a choice about being bigoted. So your question is, how do you get that into the faculty? You do things like this. I've always said that I think anybody who's in a position of authority, who has to deal with anybody of color, should be forced to do racial sensitivity training. I think you have to be forced, because you don't know that you have this issue if nobody helps you understand that you do. And to Derek's point, some people will change for it, some won't.
I would say to your question with regards to kind of carrying the burden, if you will, for or feeling like you need to speak for your entire race. If you're in that position, I would just say do it well. It's not going to change when you leave here. So I would say, honor it. When you understand the stereotypes that exist. So if you're walking down the street and you have a black hoodie on, I'm just saying it's a reality, right? So if you want to be conscious of how you change something, then you first have to understand exactly what those stereotypes are. You could very well come from, a Huxtable type background, that there are going to be some people who are going to perceive you as being here on a full financial aid ride to kind of fill a checkbox, right? When you move into corporate, that's going to be the reality. I was a hiring manager, so I knew kind of what quotas needed to be filled, if you will. It didn't mean that the person wasn't qualified, but there are metrics, even at a federal level, that have to be supported. So you have to understand the environment. Some of it is the games that are out there, but you still have to understand how to maneuver through it. It doesn't make it go away simply because you absolutely might hate it or dislike it. But every opportunity that you get, then you need to share what you know with someone else. I think Davidson can do a better job of understanding the backgrounds of all of the students, not just the minority students, but who are you? Not what you did last summer, but who are you as a person? And that's where real dialogue actually begins, is that want to understand what is emotionally draining this young lady, right? Should she even have to deal with it? Is it something that could be supported by the institution as opposed to making her feeling like it's a burden for her? If I don't know if you're involved in stuff outside of Davidson, but for me, one of the outlets was volunteering across the tracks at like the Ada Jenkins Center or something. It just takes you away from this small space where things are a lot of white noise, and gets you to a place to where you're giving back, and when you're giving back, then you're less concentrating on something that's directly like impactful for you.
One other thing I'll tell you is stay involved past your time here at Davidson. You know, you have to realize you can't always make all the change within 4 years. So, you know, stay involved at the alumni level, because that's when, sadly to say, people will actually listen to you a little bit more. Because, like, you know, now I can come back and have a talk like this. While I was at school, I probably wouldn't get up here and have this talk, you know, because I still have to get grades and all that good stuff. But, you know, like I said, they gave me my diploma now, so they can't take it back. So I just say what I want. But, yeah, I think just staying involved, and I think that's, you know, I know it's D-Band, that's one thing, you know, that we're really harping on, is that, you know, some black students leave here, or minority students in general, and they're just like, you know what, I'm not gonna have anything to do with Davidson. And that's not gonna make any changes. So, you know, you have to make a change that may help somebody you may never meet, or you may come back and, you know, help them get a job someday, you know. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Well, I want to thank the panelists, Janet, Rashida, Darren, and Darren. Thank you so much for the last.